Okay, we're all good.
Great. Thank you, Hannah, and welcome to the Planning Advisory Committee meeting of the 13th of May. As ever, as in the last year, this meeting will be conducted over Zoom. Please note the legal challenge that sought to continue local authority remote meetings beyond the 6th of May was dismissed by the High Court. We will continue to hold our meetings virtually to allow staff, to allow them to be safe for public, councillors and staff. Virtual meetings will be technically informal, but we will run them as if they are formal. We will advertise them as normal, and there will be agendas and reports, and votes and minutes will be taken. The town clerk, delegated to the planning and development manager for the planning committee, will make decisions on behalf of the council and committees that will be closely informed by these minutes. Does anyone have any questions or comments about that last statement? Great. In which case we'll continue. As usual, if the meeting has to be altered for any reason, technical or otherwise, the minutes will be posted as normal on the website. And please be aware that this meeting is being recorded. All attendees are currently muted, although we may ask the attendees to join. If you have any questions on any specific application, please let us know via the chat facility. As normal, councillors, if you wish to ask a question or make a comment, please physically raise your hand or your virtual hand so that I can clearly see you, or Hannah or Jane. Similarly, voting councillors, please raise your hand as normal. Jane will clerk and help ensure we don't miss any important questions, and attempt to show plans, photos on the screen where necessary, and Hannah will take the minutes. As ever, we're running this meeting as a safe space. We encourage all participants to be respectful of opinions of others and be mindful that what you say may have impact on the emotions of others in the meeting. And I think, without further ado, we'll go to... Oh, no, I've lost item number 1 on the agenda, which is... where is it? Questions, comments from the public and or councillors not specifically related to anything we're discussing. Any questions? Richard.
It's just a general one about the market, Boyles Cross, and the seating. I've had 1 or 2 letters in the negative from people, which I've distributed, but just to say, anybody who's watching and wants to know more about Boyles Cross, meetings are ongoing with the market and Somerset Farmers Market. So we have listened and are listening. So just to say that.
Great. Thanks, Richard. Have we got any item number 2 on the agenda? Any apologies for absence or declaration of members' interests?
We've got apologies from Anita Collier and John Nelson.
Great. Thanks very much. Anne.
As Rich has just said that, I ought to perhaps declare that I'm a director of the Frome Independent.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Thanks for that. Item number 3 on the agenda, to agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of April 2021. Hopefully everyone's read them. If anyone's got any questions, we'll take those now. No, in which case, if I get someone to propose those minutes then, please. Thanks, Richard. And seconded by Mark, and all those in favour of the minutes. Thank you very much.
And that's unanimous, thank you.
Thank you. Anne, were you not? You were agreeing to the meeting. You were, right? Sorry.
Sorry.
I wondered if you had any questions. That was the reason. Okay, fine. Thank you. And item number 4, to consider the major plan applications on appendix number 1. And now I'll pass over to Jane.
Thank you very much. Just for those who are either attending or viewing, to confirm that councillors have looked at all of the plans in advance of the meeting. So unless specifically asked to do so, we won't be putting the plans up on the screen, but as I say, they have seen them, so they'll know what we're discussing. The first application we're going to talk about is number 267 on our list, and that's 9 Baker Street, Frome. This is an application for the demolition of the existing warehouse and the erection of 1 detached dwelling. So this will involve the loss of a former employment or stroke commercial space. However, the proposal does include an area of workspace that's shown on the floor plans. The Mendit policy about the loss of employment space is as long as there is equivalent provision, the same number of jobs provided, they wouldn't be asking for information about whether it's been advertised for a certain amount of time to be used as an alternative business use, which I think perhaps is why this application doesn't contain that information. My observation on that is that whilst it does show some workspace on the floor plans, actually there's nothing to say that that must be retained, or you wouldn't know if it wasn't implemented. That said, I have looked around the building on 2 occasions now, and it is in a really, really bad state of repair. and I think actually the only option, even if it was to be reused in a office or commercial capacity, would be to have to rebuild it. And I have seen a surveyor's report on the building separately from this, which backed that up as well. Also on the point about the employment, part of the pre-application information that was submitted with the application was that Mendit didn't think it wouldn't prejudice the council's wider employment objectives by the loss of this as an employment site. The other potential issue is the parking. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it around there. It's very, very tight. There's not a lot of room for cars, although they have shown on the plans parking for 2 cars. Whether you could actually park 2 cars like that is another matter. But I also appreciate that it is very close to the town centre, and you may feel that parking isn't actually necessary in this location. And they've also provided for somewhere to park bicycles as well. And yes, I felt that the Fabric First approach that they were taking with the materials and the solar panels, etc., was a good thing to do. But over to you to discuss.
Great, thanks very much for that, Jane. Any questions? Paul first. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Jane. Yeah, it's a like so many, it's quite a tricky one, isn't it? My feeling, as I've already said in my kind of notes, is that I mean, it's an ongoing issue, isn't it, in Frome, like it probably is in every town and every city, probably. We're constantly losing employment space, and it's accepted that this particular site doesn't provide much, if any, employment at the moment, and potentially could provide employment for people working from home. However, it's a site that is for employment. And once it becomes a residential site, then it's lost forever for employment, or potentially. I mean, it's highly unlikely to be reversed. So I would really love to see, some of these sites kind of staying as employment sites. This is a fantastic opportunity. I mean, money aside, this is obviously the big issue for some small startup workspaces. This is a really perfect location in many ways. And also, I think, as I said, I think that this part of Frome Badcocks has a kind of really interesting character, which is really mixed. And again, I really regret the kind of gentrification, which this kind of application brings about. It's beginning to kind of, homogify. What's the word? Homogify? Yeah. Anyway, the area to become, kind of just residential, and there's not this kind of, this nice mix of kind of light industrial, workspace, residential, retail, or et cetera, et cetera. So I would really like to see it retained as business space. And if it isn't, I would like to see a couple of kind of more modest dwellings there rather than this kind of rather large dwelling. But that's, in a sense, that's probably not something that we can demand really. But anyway, yeah, that's it for the time being.
Great, thanks, Paul. Mark.
Thanks, Steve. With regard, Jane and I visited these premises in September last year before the applicant put his pre-app in. We had a good look around. I'm familiar with the building, having known it for years. It's a long time since it's been used for manufacturing. For many years, it's been used as purely a store for somebody who lived in the country for 6 months of the year when he was servicing festivals, and then lived abroad the other 6 months. So the employment as it was when it was sold was half a person per annum. Jane and I can see how derelict the place has become. The fact they're going to save any of the walls is kudos to them, really, because it'd be far, far easier to knock the whole place down. With regard to the mix of purposes in the area, it's quite a good mix where it is mix of retail or backs of retail and residential. The access would be really difficult for any business really, unless people were coming and going on bicycles, which we'd all like to see. But the buildings it fronts onto and backs onto have all been converted into residential, and they're either the backs of shops or they've been converted into residential premises already. The applicant seems to be making the right noises to his neighbours as getting them on side what he's doing. There is a danger of overlooking at the back, I understand, which he is trying to address. He seems to be sincere when we spoke to him about it, wanting to be a family home with somewhere where he can carry on his business at home as well. That could change. I don't know if it has changed, and he could sell it straight away. But on the face of it, he seems to be wanting to do the right thing. I agree that it would be nice to have some employment in there, but I'm afraid I have to agree with Mendip saying that it's not really an issue where it is, and for it to be made into something quite good rather than just falling down as it is at the moment is probably the best way forward.
Thanks, Mark. Anyone else? Any comments? I've got Rich and then Sheila.
Nothing really to add. I just thought, yeah, it's a shame about the loss of employment land. I totally agree with Paul, but actually, in reality, it's not such a bad design. Seems like it's in sympathy with what's already there. I think my main concern was the size of the yard or the garden. I thought, well, you could squeeze a bit more space on that perhaps, but it's not. I don't have to live there. But overall, it seems like a decent design, but it is a loss of employment space.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Rich. Sheila.
I was really going to say the same thing. Is this the building that had a query about bats?
Yes, it is. Yes.
So is there any problem with that, or do we just leave that to the conservation officer or the environmental officer?
I think there was a question raised about the bats, wasn't there? That on the notes I saw. I guess we could raise it as well. We probably should raise it as well to make sure the conservation officer.
If it's been identified, then they'll have to. I'm sure Mendip will ask for a survey to be carried out in advance before they're allowed to do any demolition works.
I think one of the consultees is a neighbour who's interested in bats and had said he'd like to see some sort of survey done. So it is registered on the website. So I guess I have to pay attention to that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd just like to support Paul's point, and we're all sort of agreeing with that. So I think it's a useful point to be made.
Thanks, Sheila. I agree. Lizzie.
Yeah, sort of echoing what's gone before on the loss of commercial space. Also, the kind of the sad precedent that sometimes you can own a building and let it fall apart, and let it become derelict, and then it becomes a free-for-all for whoever wants to take it on and turn it into something else. And that kind of loss of a duty of care for buildings, sometimes that happens. I think you see that a lot with heritage buildings. I know this one isn't particularly, but in those sorts of situations. My question was going to be around the parking situation, because this is a 4-bedroom house, I think, and they've got the space for 2 curiously parked cars on nice diagonals, when, you know, surely you go in a straight line. Is 2 parking spaces kind of what would be required for a 4-bedroom house? And or, you know, what's the situation? Presumably the kind of yard space at the moment gets used for generic parking. So what's the impact likely to be if this 4-bedroom house suddenly has, you know, 4 grown people with cars? And then what are our options for restricting that?
So it currently falls short of counties' parking standards. I think the hope is that, given that it is centrally located, you know, close to the amenities, that the county will accept a reduction in parking spaces. I mean, at the moment, there is no parking associated with the unit, other than people park right tight up to the building, but because no access is required to it, then that doesn't seem to be a problem. But yes, I mean, I think if there were 4 cars associated with the property, then that would cause problems for the people that already park and live there.
I got Anne, and then I think Mark.
I was just going to ask a follow-on question from what Lizzie said, because that occurred to me as well, that, I mean, not necessarily in this case, but if someone owns a workspace that doesn't have any jobs associated with it because they're just not doing anything with it at the moment, how long do they have to wait in order to be able to say, oh, look, it doesn't support any jobs anyway, so now I can turn it into residential? It just seems like a bit of a loophole, a bit of a back door to finding a way to convert commercial space into residential space.
Don't really think there's a clear-cut answer to that. I mean, normally Mendip would look at a building and take the last or most recent amount of usage, but I think it would be difficult to say how many people have ever been employed in that, you know, going back over the years. And yes, as I said before, normally you would expect to see, you know, details of it being advertised for sale as a commercial premises to back up the fact that there's been no interest in it, which I actually think if they wanted to, they could do, because, you know, I know it has been on the market for quite a long time, but given that they are showing on the plans that they're providing employment, albeit, you know, for themselves to run their own business from it, that's, as I said before, perhaps why they haven't submitted that information on there. But yeah, I think it is it's a difficult question to answer. I mean, you could say what you think the potential for employment could be if it were perhaps offices, or, as Paul said, startup businesses, but that's not quite how the planning policy works in this instance.
Because as a follow-up to that, you know, I've always had my eye on the former Jewson building, and that is still not being used for anything, and I can just envision something happening in a couple of years, someone saying, well, look, it's still not being used, let's knock it down and build some flats, you know, and that again seems like a bit of a shame, a real shame.
Well,
if I can come in on this one specifically, Jane, I know what you're saying, and Anna, I support what you're saying as well. But we've seen this quite a bit with pubs, haven't we? For example, the Ring of Bell has been marketed for some years as a pub and no interest. I know that these premises were marketed as commercial premises for a couple of years and no interest. It may be because they're in such poor condition. Any business wanting to move into it would first of all have to build a building. Anecdotally, and I can say this from the people who, the family of the ownership live in this street I'm sitting in at the moment, and anecdotally, the father who owned the premises was killed very, very suddenly abroad. There was a long period of, I guess, estate planning and trying to sort out a lot of very, very complicated affairs, both here and in Thailand, I think. And so that took some years during which time no one had an interest in maintaining it. So if its condition is probably a lot worse than it would have been had this person still been looking after it. So I think that was beyond the family's control. So that's in this case. But as your general point, yes, I agree that it's nice to see these things marketed. I see that Duke's is still being marketed, and we might have to ask why it's not being sold. Is it too expensive, or is it too onerous conditions, or whatever? I don't know. But your general point is valid.
Thanks. Any other comments or questions? Paul, you can come back.
Just a quick question, really, to Jane. I seem to remember that the town council had, or maybe had a policy of not allowing conversion of ground floors from commercial to residential. Was that? Am I imagining that?
There is a policy, but that only applies to primary and secondary shop fronts. So that would be, so all of the marketplace, for example, is a primary shopfront area. Catherine Hill, I think, is a secondary area, but that's as far as it extends. So it wouldn't cover this particular building. Although that has now probably been superseded by the latest round of permitted development rights that says you can do that now, subject to prior approval. I would imagine what they would want to do in the primary and secondary areas is still retain the original shop front, but that wouldn't stop it from being converted into residential.
Great, thanks, Jane. Any other comments, questions? Any other comments? Okay, from my perspective, I do think it's a shame the employment is being lost. The employment space is being lost. I sort of wonder what the residents would prefer, who are around there, whether they would prefer a residential dwelling or the employment space being retained. I suppose that's a question we'll never really know the answer to. But I guess in terms of noise and disruption, they would probably prefer residential to some sort of commercial activity. But again, as I say, you never know that. And obviously the access is pretty limited around there, isn't it? It is a tricky site to get to and from. So where do we stand on this? Are we objecting on the basis of lack of employment space, or are we just commenting that it's a great shame that we're losing employment space? I mean, is that where we're falling down?
Yeah, I think regret the loss of sounds
Right.
like a nice phrase.
Okay, thanks. Sheila, I think you were muted there, Sheila. I thought you were going to say something.
No, I'm fine. No, that's,
Right,
that's
sorry.
what I was going to say.
Any other? So are we sort of coming down on that then? That we were. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, just for the record, I think I would be objecting, but it
Right,
looks like
okay.
I'm outnumbered
Yeah.
here. So.
Right. That's
Having
fair
said that, can I just say, I mean,
Sure, of course.
having said that, I do support the design. I think the design is actually quite good, but I just really regret and object to the fact that it happens to be in a commercial space that you know, which is
Yeah.
which once lost is never regained.
Okay. Well, I think Paul is objecting, and that's great. So, Jane, I think if other councillors are not objecting but regret, then I think we can vote on that and say that either one councillor or if Paul wants to be named, you know, did object. I mean, we don't have to be unanimous, but if that's what everyone would be happy with.
I mean, generally, I reflect the consensus opinion, but I'm happy to say that if
It's up to, yeah, it's up to Paul. Paul, would you like your objection to be registered?
No, I think, as Jane said, as far as planning concerned, I don't think they're particularly bothered what I say. You know, if most of us have said one thing and I say something different, then you know.
No, it's just, you know, if you feel strongly, I mean, I'm very happy to, you know, to make that
I appreciate
that sort of,
yeah,
you know, that registered. You know, that's the way I look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think just go with the majority.
Okay.
No.
All right. Great. So, Jane, have you?
Yes. So I think what we're agreeing is that whilst we regret the loss of this building as an employment space, we have no objection. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
I know this is not a formal meeting, but I think we did say at the beginning that we would still take a vote.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah, for the record and for anyone watching this, as I said at the start, I mean, obviously government guidelines say that it's not a formal meeting, but I think for our own, for our own internal, we will take a vote. Yeah, great. If someone could propose that, please. Thanks, Sheila. Someone second. Thanks, Anne. All those in favour.
Okay, and that's a majority.
Great. Thanks. Thank you.
I think you need to ask all those abstaining or against, as it was a majority.
Who are voting against? Sorry, Paul. All those voting against, right? Thanks.
Okay, so the next on the list to discuss is
Castle Street.
20 Castle Street. I couldn't remember the number of the property, and that's number 565 on our list. There are two applications, one for listed building consent and the other is a householder application, and it's for the residential refurbishment of a grade 2 listed home, including the rebuilding of the existing attached outbuildings. You'll have seen from the images in the application that this building is in quite a sad state of repair. There's a long list of works proposed. I mean, that includes replacing the existing single-storey rear outbuildings with a new extension, adding a dormer window to the side, lots of ceiling and floor repairs even throughout the building. They want to remove the pebble glass from the front elevation, and they also want to replace modern glazing that's at the rear with timber casement windows. There's a whole list of works. Clearly the building does need refurbishment, and it appears to me that the works that they're doing are, are quite sensitive. But given that this is a listed building, we don't have access to it, and we're not familiar with what all the existing materials are inside, other than that we've seen in the report. I really think this is one where the conservation officer at Mendip would have a lot of input. But you will have seen the comments that I forwarded from the Civic Society that were far more detailed than mine. And talking, essentially they're saying that this, it must be works must be supervised by the conservation officer to ensure that effective interpretation and preservation of the historic fabric, which is basically what I said, only worded slightly better. They're also concerned about a lack of detailed working across much of the site, statement of intentions and all that. But actually, should this be approved by Mendit, I'm sure there will be a whole list of conditions that will require them to submit samples of materials and probably more detailed drawings of particular areas of the restoration work throughout. So hopefully, you know, that will satisfy some of the civic society's concerns as well. So over to you to
Great,
discuss.
thanks, Joan. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. This really is one for the conservation officer, isn't it? But any questions or comments from any councillors, apart from what Joan just said? Paul first, and then Rich.
Just a quick comment, really. I mean, I think it's fine. I support it. You know, they seem to be making the right noises, and absolutely should be overseen by the conservation officer. The comment really was that I noticed that this application includes in the extension a home office, just like the previous one we talked about, and I think several others in this week's thing. So I think it's an interesting trend we're seeing. Lots more home offices.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, it seems to be. I wonder. Quiet. Yeah, indeed. Rich.
Just to say, it's nice to see somebody putting so much effort into it, and it'd be great to see it restored. So yeah, fantastic. Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it is a bit of a mess at the moment when you drive past, isn't it? So it'd be great to see it finished. Any other comments? No. So I mean, obviously we're deferring to the conservation officer totally, but no objection.
Okay.
Great. Do you vote on that? Someone propose that for me, please. Thank you, Rich. Seconded by Paul. Those in favour?
That's unanimous. Thank you. And then lastly, that I've identified for discussion, primarily because it's one that we have discussed previously. So this is number 572 on our list, 1 Eagle Lane. And this is for the proposed alterations to the shop front, and they've now submitted revised plans. Previously, we objected mainly on the grounds that the proposals would see the loss of the existing recessed doorway, which we think was the original detailing of the doorway. And actually, if you look along Eagle Lane and down Bath Street, a lot of the shop fronts are set up like that. We're also concerned about the lighting that they were proposing, and these revised plans do retain the recessed doorway, and it appears that the lighting has been taken away as well. So just really to check whether or not you felt that dealt with our previous objection.
Thanks, Jane. Any comments on this one? I've got Lizzie first, and then Rich.
Just to clarify, it's not sort of retaining the original recessed doorway. It's replicating that look on the opposite side of the shop, kind of thing. So it's going with the principle of a recessed doorway, but not kind of retaining. And is that kind of okay? Is that, how do we feel?
Yeah, I mean,
I guess I shouldn't ask the questions. I should answer them, shouldn't I? Sorry.
Yeah. So whilst it was probably an original shop front, recessed doorway.
Originally original, yeah.
Yeah, but whether the quality of it is worth preserving or not, or whether it's just to keep it in character, with a recessed doorway. I guess that's the question I'm asking, really.
Yeah. Thanks, Jay. Rich.
It was similar to Liz's, really. So I think you've answered it. It's, you know, I know that it's not an original door; it's moved, but it keeps the basic style of it. So I would have to defer to somebody who knows about these sort of things, really. But yeah, much better than it was, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a lot better than it was. Paul.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one because it's as Lizzie points out, it's not retaining anything. It's replicating. However, I'm just looking at the elevation, and of course it's got a door alongside which goes to apartments above. Presumably that isn't original. So overall the shop front isn't really original and is already imbalanced, etc., etc. So it's. Yeah, I don't know what we'd be kind of fighting for if we kind of insisted on it staying as it is. The other thing I would say is just to note that the Civic Society did point out, which I had missed, that the on the early elevation, the glazing comes down quite low, probably, I don't know, 18 inches over floor level or something like that. But immediately behind the glazing is a counter and something else, some large canopy, a large canopy. So presumably, even though the glazing is there to kind of maintain a similar look, it's going to be obscured from the inside immediately up against the glazing, which seems a bit of a counterproductive, really, and a bit of a shame. But I don't know what we can, you know. I just wanted to flag that up.
It's not listed, so I think you're right. Maybe the fight for that, keeping the original, is probably not a fight that's that important. And because it's not listed, what they do internally isn't something that could be controlled through the planning system, unless I couldn't see it on the plan. I was just thinking, is the intention that the glazing, it's not sliding, is it, in any way, so that actually you'd have an open frontage under the canopy? No,
doesn't show that.
No. So yeah, it's not listed. It's probably not in its original state, but it probably is more in character than the original application that we saw.
Yeah. It's better, isn't it? I think that's the long and short of it. I think that's what, you know. So are we happy to withdraw our objection on our previous objection on the basis of the changes that they've made? Would that be a general consensus? Yeah, lots of nodding. Yeah. Okay. Should we do that then? Should we vote on that? Right. If someone could propose that, then please. Thank you, Lizzie. Someone second. Thanks, Mark, and all those.
And that's unanimous. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Is it worth saying it's nice to see people responding to our objections, actually, rather than objecting to our objections? It's quite nice to see somebody trying to do something.
Yeah.
They probably refuse planning. That's probably why they're responding.
Are there any other applications anyone wants to make any comments or discuss? Rich?
It's just a tree application. Can't remember what the number was, but the poplar. I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't. And when you look at related cases on there, there's already been an application for a black poplar, which may well be the same tree. It's not at all clear if it's the same tree because that was refused previously. So, as I think Paul said in his comment, it's quite impossible to make a decision on the evidence that we've got. So, intrinsically, I don't necessarily mind a poplar going, but I'd like to know why, and I'd like to see where it was. So I don't think we've got enough information.
No, they have said on their application form that they wanted to fell it because it was shading a small garden, has low amenity value, and it's close to the bordering wall. Also, it has some rotting low down where the stem splits. And then that's followed by the client doesn't wish to replant it as it seems unnecessary in a small garden, and the same problem will occur again. I think my comment was, is there an option for a more appropriate tree to be replanted if it has to come down?
Yeah, and I don't object if all of that's true. It's just, if you're going to make an application, it would be nice to really understand it a little bit better. From the drawings and from the information we got, it was really impossible to know what they were talking about, really, for me. Give us a photograph.
So do we want to make a comment on that one, or?
I think there's been enough comment that that we need more. It would be good to see more detail. Definitely. I mean,
I probably wouldn't object. But,
I'm not sure it's objection, but
just like to be sure what I'm objecting or not objecting about. It felt like I should have a little bit more information. That'd be my main query. But I'm sure if the tree officer is happy with it, they're fine. But it just felt, it's in a conservation area. And there was that previous application that was denied. So there must be a reason. And we didn't really have that.
Yeah. It seems to be a common problem with tree applications and lack of information. I think it's primarily because when the tree is in a conservation area, it's not actually an application to fell it. It's a prior notification that they're going to fell it. Yeah. And then if the tree officer deems that it's worthy of a preservation order, they can put a preservation order on it. So I think that's why we don't get such good information. But yes, it's not useful, and we have raised this numerous times in the past that we would like to see more information. But
let's raise it again then.
Yeah.
Sheila, did you have something to say?
It was on another issue. I just wanted to express. Are we finished with the trees? Just okay. It was just to, in the light of actually our sort of desire to say when we approve something rather than just when we don't approve something. I think it's worth approving the alterations down at the station, down in that area, and it looks a really useful addition, including the electrovoltaic charging points and also enabling outdoor seating for eating. My only, I think I wrote in the thing that I sent round, I was just surprised there's no transparent panels on the loggia, as they call it, to just sort of throw a bit of light down into that area. I was really surprised. But apart from that, I think the whole concept is really useful.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's great that the businesses around there, the Rye Bakeries, Hesperian and others are actually fully supporting as well, and they can see the mutual benefit of creating that space, which is good to see around the station, I have to admit. Lizzie?
I think it's a real demonstration of how a space which was, there were things there were retail things there was, Froome Rec around the back, all this kind of stuff. But actually that space has really come to life because of the creativity of local businesses. And we talk about commercial space and preserving commercial space. And this is exactly why.
Yeah.
And even though it's not the prettiest commercial space in the world, there are people who've had the imagination to kind of look at it and say, actually, yeah, we can make this work and we can make a kind of cluster of food and drink opportunities and industries there. And once everybody starts catching the train again, oh my gosh.
Which makes it all the more frustrating that the juicing site is left empty. Sorry, Anne, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a nice example of that cluster effect. That you get enough and you get a sort of movement because it's now become a place to go. If you don't want Hesperian, you might want to have a pizza, so you can pick and choose all in that one area, which I really like. I really like that effect. Yeah, and bring back the juicing building. Do something.
Oh.
I mean, yeah, I totally agree. But it's interesting this idea of a cluster effect, because that's exactly what's happening elsewhere. We're all the commercial buildings being turned into residential, because the neighbours are residential, then this one has to become residential, etc. So it's the opposite effect elsewhere.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah.
So would you, rather than a no objection, would you like me to reply that we fully support this application and welcome the EV charging point?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Should we vote on that, Jane? Are you
Yes,
going to make
please.
a comment? Someone could propose that, please. Thank you, Sheila. Seconded by Anne. And everyone.
That's unanimous.
Great.
Thank you. Paul's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Paul. I was reading the notes.
That's all right. Just as we're coming to an end, we were talking about the poor information on the tree. I just wanted to kind of flag up the poor information on 568 Nunney Road as well, which has had some dire drawings, and I don't know, I mean, it's difficult for us to really kind of make these things out. It must be, just as hard for the planning officers. So I mean, I don't think we'd necessarily object to it, but we really could do with some better drawings and thought, I think.
Can we make a general comment, Jane, to whoever's left at planning to?
I'll make it again.
I'll make it again. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Lizzie.
I mean, just on that, we've been working recently on looking at, what our guidance around sustainability and environmental sustainability might be, but is it worth us putting something out in the public domain just to sort of say, look, you might be doing an extension project for the first time. You might not have encountered this. Here's just some basics of what we expect to see from drawings in terms of, measurements and scales and directions and,
Mendip do have a house extension design guide which sets out what's needed, and there's also a list of what do they call it, registration or documents that are required for an application to be registered, which is in a list form, so it doesn't really give an example of what's needed. Because
I appreciate not everybody's necessarily going to be able to afford big beautiful architects renderings of stuff, and that's fine. We shouldn't make that a barrier to doing things if you want to try with your property. But yeah,
I think Hannah's going to say that Helen's got her hand up.
Yeah, is that okay for me to just promote her to be able to speak?
Yes, please do. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Hannah.
Oh, she's disappeared. Oh, here we go.
Oh, hello, everybody.
Hello, Hannah.
I just had something under any other business, if that's all right.
Yeah, are we finished with that point? Jane, maybe we should put something on our website with the Mendip stuff on. We'll have a chat about that.
Yeah, I think Helen's put a note in there to say that the validation criteria, which was the two words that I was struggling to remember,
Right.
it's just been updated. So yeah, we can certainly put links to that on our website.
Right. Okay, Helen. Hi.
Okay. It always. Oh, there I am. It takes a while for it to come on. We've got planning board on Wednesday, and there is at the back of that we've been asked to approve some changes to the constitution. And the planning board are allowed to do that because they are parts of the constitution that only refer to planning process. And I just thought I'd just highlight a couple of these to you in case. One of them is about the something called permission in principle. So I've looked it up online, and Jane can perhaps advise. It looks as if it's the same as an outline planning application, but it has to be 9 houses or under. It's usually housing. It's not usually for commercial or anything like that, though there can sometimes be office space over in the back garden, as Paul pointed out, that sort of thing. And I'm not sure if these normally come to you or not, but what they want to do is reduce the amount of time for ward councillor notification, and I think this is district ward councillor, from 28 days to 14 days. We've discussed this this afternoon in a Green Party meeting, And several people said, well, if someone from Glastonbury said, well, if the parish council has a 3-weekly cycle, which I think they have in Glastonbury as well, how can they have time to look at it? And how can you pick up from what they're saying, you know, because sometimes I take my cue from you. So how am I going to hear what you're saying? So I just wanted to find out, do you automatically get those permission in principle applications coming through to you? Oh, you don't get them anyway. Okay. All right. So that was one of them. Do you want to make a comment about that before I go on to the other one?
Yeah. I haven't. Is that part of the agenda? Because I must admit I didn't pick that up when I.
It's the last part of the agenda. It's an extra item 8, after all the planning applications. It's like an appendix where we're being asked to make changes to the constitution, and that's the first one. The other one is perhaps a bit more controversial. I thought I'd get that one out of the way first.
I'll have a look at it, because I'm not quite sure whether they're talking about, as you said, some kind of outline application, or whether that's the sort of prior approval, but you know, in line with permitted development that they're talking about. So I just need to double check.
They're calling it permission in principle with a capital P and then a second capital P. So I googled it,
yeah,
and it came up with something that looks like it's very similar to outline planning approval, but that it's simpler. It's to find out literally, is this okay for me to go ahead with it? And then if the council says yes, then they do a full planning application after that, like a reserved matters one.
Okay, that's certainly something that Mendip haven't done before. So I'll have a look at it. Thanks for flagging that.
Yeah, I'm a bit worried about those timescales though, and it just feels like, and it feels like, I know that Mendip are very understaffed, and it feels this other thing they're doing as well, it feels like they're just trying to chug things through without having, sorry, I'm a representative of Mendip, but it feels like to me that they're not having sufficient it's not sufficiently open and transparent for people to be able to criticise things if they so wish, having a 14-day gap. So I've already asked for clarification on that. Paul, do you want to ask for this around this one?
I just wanted to ask Helen if you know what the justification for the reduction in time is.
I checked the actual bit where it's called Appendix K, and I found it, and it was in a paragraph that was about water.
Helen K, is it?
It's about water.
Helen K.
Pardon?
It was a bad joke. Appendix Helen K.
I get lots of okay jokes. All right, okay. HK.
Cool.
You've done it now, Rich. It's frozen.
Sorry, Helen.
And then you've frozen on us. It's all Rich's fault.
Yeah.
Are you there?
All right. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Let me go on to the other one, which is probably more important. So the other one, I've lost my track now, is oh, here it is. Right. It's saying that at the moment, if an officer makes a recommendation to approve a planning application that is not in line with the development plan, and of course these days the development plan is out of date, and they're commonly saying, oh, it's out of date because we haven't got the 5-year housing supply, blah blah blah. I believe that at the moment there's an automatic referral up to planning board, or it can be automatically referred up to planning board. What they seem to be suggesting is that there are so many of these coming through now that can be delegated to the head of service, who is in person Julie Reader-Sullivan, but that doesn't really matter. She's the head of planning and growth, all right, and economic development. So she might think, oh, a small development which takes out a couple of trees but adds 5 houses to the outside of a large village like Colford is not a big deal. So she might say, although it's contrary to the local plan, or the officer might come forward with an approval, it's contrary to the local plan, and normally it would go to planning board, but let's do it under delegated officer delegated officer decision making, and they approve it. Now, again, I think it's because they're overworked and they're trying to cut down the amount going to planning board, but I also think they're probably trying to chug through housing applications going through because they need to hit their housing targets. I mean, that's as an aside. I don't really know what the motivation is. I'm trying, and I will try and uncover that at the meeting. But they seem to be saying that it's because of the workload. That seems to be the reasoning for it. But they've also said there's an increasing number of applications being referred to board, and some of them are to vary and remove conditions involving relatively minor amendments, and this is causing unnecessary delays in decision making. Now, I've asked in a clarification email, does this include, for example, the Caxton Road amendments to the drop in affordable housing? Of course, I've only sent that email off today, so I'll let you know what I get back. But that does slightly concern me, and I've had a meeting about that, by the way, with officers. But it does slightly concern me that that these things they are suggesting can be whizzed through by officers rather than. So I've asked what the safeguards are and whether ward councillors will still have the ability to be able to refer them up. And I'm not really just giving you this for information because I just think you ought to know what's going on. And if you do look at the papers and you want to give me any of your views after you've looked at the papers, I'd be very welcome, because I'm trying to get my head around it to make sure that democracy and accountability is not being compromised.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. And I've just come to, from my perspective, that seems to fly in the face of any anti-corruption, compliance issues, compliance policy that many would have, where you have one officer who has got the authority to put something like that through. I mean, it's open to all kinds of accusation and whatever.
No, I think there's a planning officer that makes the recommendation for approval, and then that has to go through the head of service. So there will be two people, yeah, that look at it. And I hope I haven't misrepresented them, but it does say that to be on the safe side at the moment, officers are referring them all up because it says in the Constitution that it has to be a significant departure from the local plan. So that's then open to interpretation as to what is a significant departure. So where there is obviously a significant departure, like in Colford recently, there was an application for about 80 houses outside, 73 houses outside the settlement limit, then that would obviously go to planning board, and the ward councillor would have also Michael Dunn, and the ward councillor would have also brought it up. But if it's a small one, like it's just 3 houses on the edge of a settlement, and it's not going to bother anybody, or it's in somebody's back garden. We had one recently. It was in was it Beckington? It was in somebody's back garden, but it was just outside the settlement limit. And was that going to go through, or wasn't it? That might be the sort of thing that they might take on delegated authority. So it's about who decides whether it's a significant departure or not. And as I say, it may be that there are plenty of safeguards that the ward councillor can still say something so I may be jumping the gun unnecessarily, but I just thought I'd flag up to you to please have a look at those papers and come back to me if you have any concerns. Yeah.
Thanks, Anne. Sorry, I jumped in before you.
No, that's okay. If I can remember it, but my point was my worry about only minor amendments don't need to be looked at again. And my concern with that is a lot of minor amendments, when they stack up together, can be a major change. And someone was telling me about some of the development that's happening in Bruton, that originally it was passed, but now it's been amended and amended and amended, and now it bears no relation to the original plans. And that would be my concern, that minor amendments still need some scrutiny. Otherwise, a lot of changes can be stacked up together.
Yeah. Okay.
No, let's be perfectly honest. I know we're being recorded, but the planners, the developers are very clever at putting amendments through to get things changed after they've got reserved matters agreed or whatever, as we've seen on Caxton Road. I mean, you know, if they'd have come to that on the upfront, they'd have probably got a bit of pushback. But it's you know, they're pushing it through as an alteration. So I totally agree, Anne. I really do. Sorry, I got Sheila. Sorry, Sheila. I didn't see.
It's fine. Sorry. I think the principle which you implied would be useful, Helen, is that ward councillors should be at the very least copied into that sort of thing, so that they can actually flag up local knowledge. And I think we've seen that local knowledge is really important in lots of different situations. And I think that would be a principle that I think should apply and should be checked out, like you're saying.
Yeah. You're muted, Helen.
I will check it. As I say, I may be jumping the gun here, and it may just be that they just want to speed things up a bit. But I do think I should very much hope that they would still copy us into all the applications coming forward, and they wouldn't just approve them and zoom them through without us seeing them. So yeah, I'll check on that as well. I mean,
some of that decision making to the parishes. Just a thought.
Pardon?
That they could always delegate some of that decision making to the parishes. You know, just a thought. You know, they want to speed things up a bit.
Yeah.
I think Mick Dunks just put a comment. Julia Reader Sutherland is not a trained planning officer, which I suppose is a good point as well. Good point to be raised. So.
I'll read through the papers and I'll drop a note round to everybody if there's anything that I, feel is of concern, and then we can pass it on to Helen if we agree that. So
great, thanks so much, Jane.
Thanks for raising that, Helen. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Helen, and thanks for turning up, Helen. And Nick. Thanks
it might be a storm in a teacup. I just don't know yet, so we'll find out.
Great. Okay, any other business? Any other comments, questions? Great. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody. Oh, thanks very much. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Waving.
I told you where the next meeting is. Next meeting is 6th of June, is it, June?
3rd of June.
3rd of June. Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah.
Well, papers all over the place.
May or may not be virtual, maybe hybrid, maybe I will in person, to be confirmed.
I'm sure it will